Alrighty, I am joined on today's very special episode of the Story Together podcast with an absolute legend in the community, Johnn of roleplaying-tips.com, a GM since 1980, almost certainly playing V1 back in the day, way before my AD&D times. He's got a thriving Patreon, and I was just joking with him before we started recording that he's essentially the Jedi archivist of GM tips over a 40-year period, which I think is absolutely magical. So, John, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on today for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for setting the expectations so high that I'll struggle to meet them. That's awesome.
If I'm not a hype man for the people on this show, what are we even in this for, John? Honestly, but it's a real pleasure. So, obviously I was taking a look, at role playing tips, and you just have all this incredible wealth of experience and expertise. But before we kind of dive into some of the best practices that I'm sure you've gleaned, and I think you're very transparent on your blog. Listen, you've learned just as much as you've given other people, which I think must be incredibly gratifying. So I want to ask you first, and this is a common question I ask folks on this podcast, is I know that you got started at the lunch table, like a lot of us did, right, back in school. But I'd love to zoom in quick at the beginning. Do you recall a moment, a scene, a character that you knew, like, I'm going to be doing this for a long time? Like, is there that moment for you that you recall?
Yeah, it was rolling the dice. So the person, Sean, in 5th grade, tricked the teacher into running a game for the class.
Amazing.
And so promptly on a Friday afternoon, half the class split. All the girls went to one side and did nothing with the game, and all the guys went to the other side and were kind of interested. And then eventually it was just a group of us. But anyways, so he had a box set, and he had the little it was the light blue resin polyhedrons, the dice.
Yep.
I can't remember what you call it, but anyway, so he had these, and I was, which one's the D20 again? What's the D4? Like,
right.
It's the one you don't step on. So that was the hook for me. And my character, now I don't remember actually what happened in that class. It was just pure chaos because the teacher took off. So we were, no chaperone. So what are you going to do? But then he started up a lunch game. Yep. And he had recruited enough of us. So at the lunch game, there was a lineup. So you stood in a line, and there was the chairs around at a table. And then he sat on the other side of the table as the GM with the screen and stuff. Yep. So when your character died, then you got up, you went to the back of the line, and the next person in the line sat down, and then they got their character. My character, when I got a turn, was a cleric. And I encountered on the first round a carrion crawler. I got paralyzed, and then I got eaten, and I was done in about 5 minutes.
Oh, boy.
But it was the dice that hooked me that afternoon. I was like, wow, this is really neat. I don't know why. Some kind of stationary fetish, maybe.
Maybe. But do you consider yourself a dice goblin, John? At this point, has it gone down the rabbit hole? Do you have a massive collection somewhere?
I'm looking over my shoulder. I definitely have a dice problem. Yes. Yeah. Is there a number I can call about that?
You know what? Maybe that should be the next part of role-playing tips, is a helpline for those of us. By the way, my wife and I would be calling you for what it's worth.
Roll with that, then.
Oh, my gosh. And call it that. Call it roll with that, except maybe the opposite, I guess, in that case. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I think a lot of us started in that childhood. I think what we did is very similar, these sort of improv RPGs around the table. And then when dice came, you're like, oh, my God, this is the best. We started off with a 2D6 system. It was a Lord of the Rings RPG.
Wow.
Obviously, I respect our D20 counterparts, but totally got started the same way, John. And we still play with those same guys too. I don't know if you play with anyone like the legend that is now Sean from the 5th grade, but do you have any players that you play with from your childhood that are part of any regular? Because I know obviously you were in Vancouver, you worked at BioWare, which is I definitely want to dig into. Do you have any like lifelong RPGers that you've been playing for 20, 30 years with?
No, actually, I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago. Strange you mention it. I seem to, whether you call it churn, maybe they're sick of me, or just life circumstances, their circumstances, but I go through a new group about every decade.
Okay.
And it's not on purpose. It's just the way it goes. So when I moved from Vancouver to Edmonton, for example, there was Fantasy Grounds, but it had just started, and it was really tricky, and high bandwidth internet wasn't a thing back when you pedaled cars with your feet. So Yeah, I had to find a new group, and I don't know. There just seems to be this kind of turnover in my history of gaming. So no, I have met a couple of people from a long time ago, but we
Sure.
haven't gamed RPGs. Just kind of connected and said hello and stuff. But yeah, not really.
So speaking of moments of inspiration then, from those every decade or so groups, what was sort of the inciting point for you for starting role-playing tips? I think you started, what, 99, somewhere in that vicinity, or at least you started treating it super professionally in 99. So 25 years of history of doing this. Like, was there a similar inciting point for you? It was like that really inspired, like, listen, I want to put myself out there in this way. Because think about it like this. Another thing I'd love to hear you touch on is there a set of best practices for being a GM? Is there a meritocracy, or is it more fluid? Like I tend to believe it is, that it's really bespoke to who's at the table with you. What sort of, spurns your interest? Like, listen, let's get all these best practices together. Let's make a community out of this, and put yourself sort of front and center, which has been very nerve wracking, I would say, in the late 90s, when, nowadays I think a lot of this is televised in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
Matt Mercer and Brennan and a lot of those people, right? Some of the real, OGs of actual play. Like, what, you're 17 years ahead of that. Like, what was the inciting element for you?
yeah. So yeah, I started it in November of 1999.
Yep.
Not professionally. I don't know if I've yet achieved professionally, but I was running my own business then. It was an internet company, and I was trying to sell basically web pages to businesses in Vancouver.
Sure.
And back then, I still remember there was a lot of media, a lot of press about, is the internet a fad
Mm.
in 1999. So trying to get companies interested in getting a web page built was kind of difficult. But anyways, I was in that Netscape 1 time era, and I thought, okay, first of all, being a GM was a lonely thing.
Mm.
And I also wanted to turn it into a job or a revenue,
Yeah.
like a side hustle. I'd want to make it a side hustle.
Sure.
And so I got together with two friends in Vancouver, and we brainstormed some ideas. And we initially founded or created a company called The Art of Role Playing.
Okay.
And we had all kinds of ideas for using. So multimedia was a thing back then. So you got CD drives with some optical media, and
Yes, sir.
the games were just coming along in those days, and that kind. Doom had just made a landing around that time too. So we thought, well, we could really enhance role playing games and GMing with some digital tools. That was one angle of it. And our first foray was creating a few articles, and we did that in the summer. But then we petered out. Not all groups stick together. Not everyone's can be the Beatles. And so I decided, though, that I liked the thread that we had started. So
Sure.
I decided to go with role-playing tips, knew how to register a domain name. Back then, it was quite expensive through ICANN, I think. Anyways.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea was, okay, GMing is a lonely thing, because all there was at the time was news groups and flame wars, and there was not social media. And Hotmail was still trying to get people to get more Hotmail email with the automated signature at the bottom saying, get an email, use Hotmail, kind of a thing. When was it Web Crawler and Alta Vista and all those things?
Alta Vista, baby.
We're still alive. So the impetus was, great, well, why don't I start a tip exchange? Because I want to be an awesome game master. And so I need to level up my game. How am I going to do that? Because Dragon Magazine wasn't really full of tips, and I couldn't find a lot of other avenues around for it. And like I said, the online space was pretty sparse.
Gotcha.
Prince Etrigan's page, Jonathan Kim's page, and just a couple of others. And so, so it was born from there. And then, then it took off. So I started off, I had 2 emails, my own and my mom's. That was the first newsletter. And then it slowly spread. And then the internet, year 2000, after no one died in Y2K, the world continued on. The internet sort of took off, and no one was asking, is it going to be a fad? Is it going to fade away? And it just went on from there.
That makes sense.
That was the major impetus to how do I be a better GM? And I'd like to network with other game masters and learn from them.
No, that's perfect. Actually, I don't know if you know this. We actually share a similar professional background, shortly after September 11th, my mom signed me and my three best friends up. So this is in obviously October 2001 for at a local community college, how to code websites by hand with HTML,
Yeah,
which
cool.
coincidentally got me my first job out of college. And that's why I'm in tech right now. So I was, I empathize. This is pre-Dreamweaver. This is when you open up Notepad and, title head, so I do have some experience in that world, but no, I appreciate it. So given that, listen, you knew this was a passion. It had been a passion for you for quite some time. You started connecting with all these GMs. You started to get real tips. You started to say what's successful in a game. Like your most recent blog post, for example, is dealing with, I believe, dealing with the GMs who had submitted, a question to you in your group. I'm frustrated. My players aren't, following a lot of the obvious prompts or hooks, and I had spent all this time. And your thing was, kind of and it's very wise, like the Bruce Lee. You gotta be like water. You gotta be flexible. It's not a film. And I thought you did such a wonderful job pointing out the major differences between being a writer, right?
With an audience.
A different types of storyteller who, I think you even said this in the article, like they can edit, I go back or erase. Once something's happened, we don't have that luxury. So as you're getting all of these tips, were there any that like really stood out to you that like, whoa, like this is something I would love to incorporate in my own playing and my own games? Like what were some of those initial ones where like, geez, maybe I'm the one that's also just starting to learn. I find that all the time. I'd love to hear some of those from you.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head. But I've always been drawn to adventure building, plot hooks, ideas for encounters and villains and plot lines and things like that. But I'm trying to think. One that actually fun one stands out is what was it? The 10 Commandments of Monty Hall GMing. It was basically what not to do as a game master.
Okay.
And that was like a proto dungeon world GM agenda back then. So what are your principles as a GM, or what are your goals, your heuristics for this campaign? And so avoiding the key mistakes. And I can't remember the author, but we could find it in the archives. Another one that sticks out is about the time bomb mistake. And I think that was what started me trying to figure out the differences in our mediums. And I didn't think of it in that way in those days. But if I'm reading a book, I'm looking at say CNN on TV. So CNN there's a talking head, but then there's all that stuff around the sides. There's scrollers and up to dates and flashing graphic. And you look at a book, the book doesn't have that, right? It's a completely different medium. So you need to do something different to make a book appealing than you do to a television show to make that appealing.
Sure.
And then in the middle, you might call it radio. So what does a radio need to do that's different than the television and print material? So I think of role-playing games as a different medium unto itself, that we should do things slightly differently or a lot differently in order to take advantage of its potential. There's an old video on YouTube, and I cannot find it, where it showed one of the very first television shows. And the commercials had a cigar lady, so from the theater times of the day, standing beside an easel. And then there was a guy with a mic just off camera reading basically the advertiser's message off of the easel. And that was a commercial back then.
Yeah.
And if you think about commercials now the production quality and their messaging and how they go about doing all of the stuff, all of the gimmicks and the things. So I still think we're in the early days of RPG, where a lot of us are still there manually taking off slides off of an easel for a television show, because we don't quite understand. We haven't fully explored all the corners of our medium and figured out how to take maximum advantage. So I think this time bomb solution, it came down to a logic flaw, where if you were trying to make the characters do something and you're trying to build something out that would happen, but you get a mistake wrong, you can't fix it, because in a book you can go back and edit it, like you had mentioned. You're stuck with it. So what do you do? How do you deal with, oh, John, the last session, the barbarian's name was Bob. and this time it's not. It's Bill. So what's going on? Reality changed on us.
Yep.
So, and it's actually named Thundar for anybody who's really interested. So that was article I think stands out to me, as well as the Monty Hall one.
Yeah, and I think you raise actually a point that I've had the luxury of working in the generative AI world. You talk about the future of the tools, and I've posted some videos about this, that I don't think people realize how fundamentally multimedia is going to change very soon.
Yeah.
And the capacity for role-playing games to use these tools, I think in an artist-friendly way, is going to make us look like dinosaurs very fast. So obviously, I would imagine if you're, you have your wonderful group, you're getting all these tips, you're obviously dispensing advice, and you grow as any teacher does through that process. Have you thought about, when I try to tell people about what I'm trying to do, I say we're in the black and white movie era. Right? We're way at the beginning still, right? Do you have any strong thoughts about where you'd want to see some of these tools go? Right? Like if you could control where some of these tools could go, how we play stories together, right? What would some of those tools look like? Obviously, in Star Trek, you have the holodeck. That would be amazing. Like if we could just go in Lord of the Rings and we're all in the Fellowship on a Friday night, that would be great. But in terms of playing a story with, what we think of as an RPG, have you given, I'm sure you have, what thoughts have you given into where you'd like to take it? Because there's just, insanely cool opportunity out there.
Yeah, I agree. The new open AI.
Yeah, the Sora demonstration was something. Yeah.
Amazing, right? So I think people at Hollywood should be updating some resumes. So the future, as I see it, and my record of predicting the future according to my bank account is very, very bad.
I see.
It will be a different medium again.
Okay.
So there's the logic that says you will no longer need a game master, because the experience can be facilitated by something that can replace a game master and be superior in many ways. So why do you, like, what's the function of the game master? Why do you need the game master? Once AI, maybe GPT-5, hard to say, but once it gets actually generative and has a little bit more thinking behind it, then it can start surprising us and not getting as repetitive and not giving us the signals that say, oh yeah, that's AI. That was written by AI, I can tell. And in which case, then I think we're playing a different game. So then, we're comparing apples to oranges at that point.
Okay.
So instead, the way I look at it is, okay, the game that we play today has a game master and players. And what makes the game fun is that we have the human element to it. And so we will keep that. So there's no human element in a hologram except players being players.
Yep.
Or not hologram, but in the holodeck, sorry.
Yeah, I know what you meant.
Yeah. So, I guess in that example, at some point you might have Q being a villain as the game master.
Oh my God. Can you imagine? Jesus H. Christ. Yeah. Oh boy.
But the interaction is different. And so what I'm thinking of, what I'm trying to get to is there are still a lot of artists who use physical materials, and they use pastels and pencils and paint in a world where Photoshop is king. And so I feel that the way that I play the game is going to be like those artists who use the physical, who stay kind of in the same game structure and in the sort of the same paradigm. And then we will have basically AI-driven video games. And those are two different things. And so there'll be the people that like that and prefer it. There will be people that like the way the game is today. And then there'll be people who like both. And how we can use AI if we want to keep the game in the same kind of structure where there's one person running it and then players kind of exploring their world, the game master's world and imagination, is I think AI has a role in terms of second brain.
Yes.
So
yes,
I
it does.
encourage anyone, like I co-wrote a book with Daniel McKeever over at EnchantedScribe.com, and we wrote a book on AI. And our stance is, how can we use AI to supplement our job? And in the forward, I wrote that what we want to do is try to use, try not to let our brains get rusty by having AI replace some of the things that might seem difficult and friction, full of friction today. But we don't want to just let AI take that over. Otherwise, our brains will atrophy and we will lose our imagination, our ability to think on our feet and improvise, and our ability to kind of think even in terms of structures and plot lines and
Yeah.
planning and all that stuff. So I think then, and this is what we've done with an app we've created called Campaign Logger. There's an AI component we call the AI Zorgon, which is also the name of the
The
beholder on my
beholder.
hat.
Yeah.
And it is okay if you get stuck, ask AI. If you in the future can use AI to track more details simultaneously than you can hold in your head, but you are still the primary creative force, it's Ian being the GM and
Mm-hmm.
expressing himself at the game table and telling collaboratively stories with players. But it's Ian's monsters, Ian's world, to whatever degree of co-creation that you want. That needs to remain number one. And so Zorgon and any other AIs will be our second brains. And maybe don't forget, John, it was Thundar the Barbarian 26 sessions ago. And if the AI is listening and giving me real time, like a heads up display of
Yeah. Yeah.
things, but I think it's got to be second seat. And it's like at a co-GM or an assistant GM, and it's number two. So my rambly response is AI definitely has a place, in my opinion. We can embrace the technology to be better storytellers and better creators and designers. But I encourage people not to let it replace and do the thinking for you. Sort of like if you only use a calculator, you stop learning how to add numbers. So.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. It should be additive. I think people shouldn't fear it replacing humans, because even if it can get to the point of genuine human ingenuity, I don't know if it'll ever care the way that a human cares about the person sitting across the table whose character has just had a profound apex-like moment of understanding that has a metaphorical resonance in that real human's life. I don't know if an AI will make connections with that. Maybe it will, and I'm underestimating it. It very well may. But I do think if you can restrict large language models to an artist's mind and the resources that they bring to bear, their writings, their art, it can serve as a source of inspiration. It could flesh out a city in seconds, right? But it's fleshing it out based off of your notes, based off of your layouts, things that have inspired you, things that you have intellectual property over because it's you. I think in that way, whether you call it a Copilot assistant or Zorgon or anything else, at the end of the day, I think there's a huge place for that. I think I would love that. I mean, I started to use in my private game, just because I don't think you should make money off of it. I used just generative AI to create battle maps on Roll20 just to see what I could do with it. And this was like 2 months after its release. And even then it was really good. Now it's ridiculous. In 2 years, it's going to be kind of like table stakes in a certain frame of reference. So I really appreciate your answer, John. And I think to your point, what I'd love where to go next is, obviously, I think what you're trying to say is the human element being the central nexus is there for a very specific reason, because we live the human condition in a way that an AI won't be able to. Even in like a bicentennial man, it's still their experience versus ours, the human experience, right? So to that end, I'd love to hear, and I always ask this on this show, I'd love to hear about some moments or scenes from stories that you've played over the past 30, 40 years that still stay with you. I could go on for hours, but I'd love to hear, and I don't want to put any pressure because you're like, geez, I got a Rolodex here, buddy. Like, how much time do we have? But I'd love to hear some of those moments that stick with you, that inspired you, that you carry with you, that make you a better person. I'd love to hear a few of those.
Yeah, I'm terrible with remembering history. For whatever reason, I'm always like thinking forward, and I did never reflect, and so I can never come up with, hey, what are your top 10 favorite movies? Those questions always stump me, but I know there's a couple. One is a friend last year we got gaming together over COVID
Yep.
from a group from like 20 years ago, and he told me, and I didn't remember this, but he told me a story. This is how not to be a GM. So we rolled new campaign. We rolled characters, and they started off in the north. And I can't remember if it was inspired by Icewind Dale or not at the time. It was around that time, though.
Hmm.
Anyway, so then he said that I said, oh, great, here's your hooks. Basically, I laid out the storyline, and they said, okay, well, and I believe I said, look, if you go to the south, that's where the mission is. Like, not in so many words, but that's the gist of it. And he said that they decided to go to the north. Now, this is the part that I do remember. So I said, okay, well, to the north, it's dangerous, it's cold, it's deadly. There's terrible beasts there. Your first level characters,
There's
but
giants, there's pirates, there's pretty much everything bad.
yeah, exactly. And there's nothing of interest there. Like, you've heard no rumors. There's just, it's like there's no adventure there. So the party said, okay, great, we understand. So we head north. So
Of course.
they headed north. So we played 2 hours apparently, and there's nothing happened. And then eventually I got frustrated, and I said, great, the ice crevasse that you're on, the ice breaks away, and you all fall to your deaths. End of campaign.
Oh my God. You just TPK'd them because you're like, all right, this is boring. I'm good.
Yeah, I was, for whatever reason, unable to just, the players were going in a direction. I should have seized that moment, right? Players want to do something.
Yep.
Great,
Yep.
I will roll with that, pun intended. And so just was inflexible as a game master. Now, he paid me back, because when we played a Cyberpunk 2020 game in the first session, same group, even the same room, so we rolled up characters, and I step out of the limousine,
Yeah.
big black long car limousine. I step out, and the rest of the party gets out of the limousine, and he says, great, you hear a shot. John, roll a dice. And so I fail, and I got shot through the head. I was assassinated, very beginning of the game. Bad dice roll. So there's 2 memories, but that, I think, is either karma or well played on behalf of the players. So,
the dice don't forget, John. I think you know that. The dice do not forget. That's what my brother calls it. He calls it love dice. Like, if you always love the dice, they oftentimes pay you back. And given his rolling record, I'd have to say I agree with him.
Do you have one of those dice prisons? Do you penalize your dice in any way?
I don't. I always find one that I bond with in a campaign, and then I don't change from it no matter what. I feel like that's the most honorable way to go about it. Even if I roll great, if I roll terrible, I feel like it was meant to be, and I have to be. Yeah. It's my job to go with the flow. I think, to your point, actually. So, although Dice Goblin Collective aside, like, I'm looking at one I got, King Richard's Fair. There's beautiful glass rainbow dice that I would never actually use in a game, but they're like one of my prized possessions over there. But to your point, as you're kind of dealing with these moments and you mentioned different settings, actually, and that's where I wanted to go. Is you played Cyberpunk 2020. Obviously, I think you're probably most famous for your work with Dungeons and Dragons, although you can certainly correct the record on that. In terms of systems and settings, I grew up on the Forgotten Realms, right? Baldur's Gate 2 is my second favorite game of all time. I think the mythology of Forgotten Realms is fantastic. And now with Baldur's Gate 3 and real money, real talent, real resources going into fleshing out that world, we're going to get a television show. We're going to get more movies, right? What are some of your favorite systems and settings that you've played over the years? So obviously GM, role-playing tips is, I would imagine, system agnostic, although I would imagine you have a clear expertise. I'd love to hear, where some of your favorite systems and in histories, because I also love a cyberpunk setting too. If you probably can't see the background of my computer, but it's literally a cyberpunk city right now for a board game that I was just messing around with. But anyway, I'd love to hear your POV there, John.
Yeah, I started off. So after I played in grade 5, Sean was the GM, killed me in 5 seconds flat. That's probably the karma cycle again, right? When I think back on it, oh yeah. And then I did that to my players, and that happened to me again. So I guess the shoe is about to drop at some point. What's the stage I'm at now? Oh, I need to kill some players arbitrarily early on in the campaign. I think that's the stage. But so I had no idea what I had done there. I didn't know what the game was called or any details. And it was summer. I had that craving, like, wow, what was that thing that I played in the spring? So I made my own game, fashioned after WWF. Back then it was called WWF, before the World Wildlife Fund thing happened and they had to rebrand to WWE. But it was a wrestling game.
Yep, of
And
course.
so I remember there's dice. So I pulled dice out of my Monopoly game. I had a couple of 6-siders that way.
Yeah, baby.
And
D6.
made a
Let's go.
wrestling fighting ring game. And,
That's awesome.
whatever 10-year-old could muster. I just remember I just wanted a ladder and I wanted the bad guys to always, lose in the final bout.
Right.
But then my friend actually got D&D, the box set.
Yep.
For Christmas of that year. So that was 1979 over to 1980. And he said, "Oh, books. Okay, you read it, Mr. Glasses." And so I inherited these books. He didn't say it like that.
Yeah.
But, he wanted me to figure things out. Oh, this is the amazing game that I played earlier this year. Wow, this is awesome. So, and that he got along with that, The World of Greyhawk. That was at the time a very thin pamphlet, 2 pamphlets inside a cover with envelopes in it. I don't know what the technical term for that is.
I don't either. Yeah.
Anyways, so Greyhawk. So we spent a long time and many, many hours in Greyhawk. So
Very
first
cool.
of all, that is one of my favorite settings. However, at the time, because it was AD&D, we started out basic, and then I bought the Player's Handbook and the DMG, not realizing they were different games because they both said Dungeons and Dragons, the red book, the blue book, and then the AD&D stuff. So I thought, oh, it's all the same game, and so I started mixing and matching, and that's terrible. I made a terrible thing of it. But the magic items out of the DMG, and so all the Greyhawk stuff had epic names like Mordenkainen and
of course,
and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I loved Greyhawk for the monsters and the treasure. Only years later did I realize, wow, this is an amazing geopolitical setting. And so then I ran Greyhawk again for a while. I returned it and did it that way. And then had a nice epic finale in the Sea of Ashes. So that's one setting. Then in 1986, I believe, the Forgotten Realms box set dropped.
Yeah, I think around then, yeah.
Around that time, that's probably when the time I acquired it. At least it might have been older than that. And then I had also started reading the Moonshae trilogy, which was I don't remember. I think that preceded the Dragonlance books, but they were amongst the first D&D type of books that I read because I done Lieber and all the Conan books and stuff like that. And these were even closer to this amazing game. So Forgotten Realms, mostly in the Moonshae area and in the along the Sword Coast. And so Waterdeep was amazing with its Shadow Council and spoiler alert, Zurgon, which is actually the root of that. So I had the mysterious leader being, I don't even know if Xanathar was the name back then.
Yeah, so he runs like the underground thieves guild, but it's actually low-key a beholder the whole time. Is that what that is? Yeah.
And so anyways, all of that stuff. So Forgotten Realms was another amazing setting for me. And then I started making my own settings and had some modicum of success. My favorite one was 7 Cities, but it was fantasy and stuff. And then around 1992, I played Ars Magica for the first time.
Oh, I never have. I actually never played that one.
And so that had a number of innovations, rotating GMs, asynchronously power balanced characters in the same party. So you had a wizard whose spell effects would last until the next sunset, like bring the moon a little closer or something like that. Change the weather for a mile area, which was superior than D&D second edition kind of scale of that time.
Yep.
And then, but it was based in Mythic Europe, so it was history, which I've always had an interest in, growing lately. And but added with demons and fairies and whatnot. So you take the magic out of from the Catholic Church and from different Eastern myths and legends and other things, and add all that. And so that was an amazing setting. So well, I didn't get a lot of game hours in Mythic Europe. I had a lot of reading hours and going through the books. The Ars Magica third edition book is very dog-eared, and especially from reading the setting there. And then. And then I guess my other main one would be Birthright. And so that was a second edition D&D kingdom builder. And it also had rules through the supplements of mass combat, ship-to-ship battles, and other kinds of things. And it was in a quasi-Western medieval setting, but the rulers were monsters as well as human player characters and stuff that had sort of a mystical tie to the realm. So their life force was part of the
Got it.
kingdom
Yep.
things. But there were resources, chop down a forest, get some wood, go
Yep.
play Settlers of Catan, come back, have a 5-room dungeon adventure, and away you go. So
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, that was an amazing setting. And I had 2 campaigns in that. And so
Nice.
that one also is near and dear. And like the idea of the Dragonlance worlds, Dark Sun, and El Qadim, also all from the D&D sphere, of course, but I didn't actually play those. I just collected the games and read the boxes. And then any others before I shut up here? Any others that are not D&D?
You said you were playing Cyberpunk.
Yeah, Cyberpunk is always so growing up, born 70s, growing up in the 80s, Cyberpunk became a thing.
Yeah, Blade Runner.
Yeah, some really, really strong books. And I really enjoyed that genre. But I didn't actually, so it was always the first thing I would read in like GURPS Cyberpunk, or in Cyberpunk 2020, or what was the ICE version of Cyberpunk called? Anyways,
I actually don't know.
But anyways, always I go to the timeline. What's going to happen in the future? How will they make future dystopian? And I guess they just read the newspapers from 2024, but they really good material there. But I always ended up just making my own future. I like the idea of just saying, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened, that I never stuck with their settings. I made my own timelines, but I didn't spend a lot of hours at the game table in those homebrew settings of mine. They're always Earth, of course.
Yep.
Before Google Earth to steal all the maps and get all the details. It's an amazing tool. But yeah, that's and then science fiction. I didn't really play a lot of science fiction, but I think my favorite one is Gamma World. But I was a player in Gamma World.
Nice.
And all I remember was gonzo science fiction fantasy. I don't have any impressions of the setting itself and what it was called. Yeah, so anyways, those would be my highlights. Obviously, D&D centric.
Yeah, no, and that's perfectly fair. Yeah, I mean, very similar. I would say we released in December our first actual play show. The setting is 100 years from now, to your point, where, I feel a lot of what we have for movies and television shows over the past decade you see a lot of apocalyptic themes. Yes. I wanted to go like the complete opposite. Like in Star Trek, there's a little bit of a conceit in Star Trek where it's like, well, it's kind of somewhat easy for humanity to band together post World War III, and there's aliens. So like, what does it look like with us being able to? What does it look like if our species had its first golden age, and what were the scale of problems that we would solve intellectually, creatively, spiritually? Like, what does that look like? It's only 9 episodes, but I definitely empathize with your desire to kind of project forward. I completely agree with that. And I also, even in the past, my favorite genre is historical fiction. It's like I'm addicted to it. I have a problem. I should probably, speaking of helplines that I could call, like historical fiction RPGs are, oh my gosh, I could go down a rabbit hole, but this is your interview, not mine. But I love sort of the diaspora that you're kind of going with, John. I just completely agree with you. Are you a
Rutherford fan?
What's that?
Are you a Rutherford fan?
Well, I think it comes from a desire to expose how incredible it is that we even have an opportunity to have a society right now, given what's happened with our species in the past 15,000 years. Like the fact that we made it this far is so unbelievably lucky and incredible, and a testament to our ancestors. Not that, immensely. I mean, Genghis Khan killed so many people that the earth literally cooled. I'm not saying there weren't bad things, but I think it's just genuinely incredible. And I love, so, like UNESCO World Heritage Sites, if you've heard of them. Basically,
I've heard of them. Yeah.
it's a division of the United Nations that says this is historically, culturally, and even spiritually relevant for humanity. So I like taking stories around what made those special and then use them as areas where RPGs can learn. And then, because by definition, you're learning real history. By definition, you're saying, oh, wow, these people were genuinely incredible. They certainly weren't perfect, but there are areas in literally every culture all around the globe like that. And that's really what inspired me. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's like one author that I could sit here and go, but that act of being able to do it inspires me. And I just love, to your point, you talk about voraciously reading, the amount of Wikipedia rabbit holes, and then I go find the first and second party sources, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden it's like 2 a.m. I'm like, I should probably be in bed 3 hours ago because I'm a dad. It's like one of those situations, John, for sure. But I just completely agree, and I think that's really cool.
I especially like
Yeah.
I'm interested in geopolitics now, and so now I'm seeing history again through that lens. So it's kind of cool. I get to go back to the same things, but through a different way of looking at it. But I think it's really cool to put yourself in someone else's shoes who lived before you, even if they're a fictional character, and you go through, especially certain kinds of fiction or resources, you kind of get an idea of their day to day, because we have we assume that people before us were dumb or dumberer, and we might be that, but they certainly weren't. They just had different technology, and they had a certain limit of cumulative information to work with at any given time. And so how do they fill up their hours in the different social strata of the different? And then it wasn't until COVID and I started watching a lot of historical YouTube videos that I was shocked at how many civilizations there have been in our history. Like, oh, you got the Greeks and you got the Romans and the Mongols, but wait a minute, how many hundreds have civilizations have existed? And they all had their own cultures and points of view and way of doing things. And so I've found it extremely interesting to explore that end of it. And for good role playing, but not that for that purpose. But it's, I advise any GM who's interested, go look at history through the lens of the day-to-day people and the different jobs and roles and civilizations that existed.
1,000%. I would be remiss as especially like a mid 2000s BioWare fanboy. Were you aware that they were making the greatest trilogy of video games of all time in Mass Effect when you were there, or is that something that you realized later? I'm sorry. It's literally, Mass Effect is my favorite trilogy ever. I love that game. I think it's not without its flaws, but I just love it. With your time there, like you, obviously, I think you're a web developer. Maybe you're a systems architect. But I think you're a web developer. So you're literally at the apex of Western role playing games at that time. How fulfilling was that? Was that the coolest thing ever? Am I projecting too much on your past experience, John? Like, what was that? I have to know. Like, I would be remiss if I didn't ask.
Yeah, the web team was part of marketing, was really lucky because we didn't have to work 14-hour days, 6 days a week for years.
Yes.
So we got to avoid that side of the industry, but it was pretty amazing. So I joined just as they were producing DLC for Neverwinter Nights.
Oh, I love Neverwinter Nights. Neverwinter Nights 1 is super underrated. People don't realize it has one of the greatest video game twists of that era, with Lady Arabeth. I mean, how can you spoil a game that came out in 2002? But like, it has. And then it was like, yeah, by the way, the main villain are ancient lizards that are time traveling. And you're like, whoa, like what's happening right now? And then the Diamond Edition came out, the first scenario model that had a lot of these really good plug and play 3D models. Neverwinter Nights, you heard it from me. But anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I don't mean to fanboy over it, but actually I totally do if I'm being completely transparent. But anyway, I'll shut up. Zip.
So the day-to-day was amazing because you were working with that material. So you were working with the best writers in the industry, and that you're working with the artists and the VFX people and the coders and whatnot, and that you just like steeped in video game lore and culture and whatnot. And so that was amazing. So I was just in at the tail end of that, and then the first kind of full game cycle I was part of was Jade Empire. And then in parallel, they were developing Mass Effect. And so I was there for the Mass Effect 1 release. And then I left in 2004. So I
Hmm.
think that was, I don't know if they probably started plotting the story of Mass Effect 2, the sequel. They had already probably done enough in
Dragon
Mass
Age
Effect.
Origins is '09. Yeah.
Oh, and Dragon Age, yeah, that hadn't quite released yet, but that was, yeah, part of it. And so, yeah, you got to speak with all the teams and work with the assets. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was a dream job for sure.
I can imagine
Absolutely.
my wife. I wish I had it. It's right up there. It's not a leather bound, but it's a hardcover of the history of BioWare, and it's like, so think about the basis from which we evaluate modern role playing games.
Yeah.
Neverwinter Nights, Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect, Jade Empire is criminally underrated. It's a joke. Like when we're in the, again, we talked about this at the very top of this, right? We're in the black and white movie era. When are we
Yeah.
going to start talking about some of the people who created this, like Spielberg and Scorsese, given the sales and numbers these video games? There are mobile video games that make more than some of these movies. Like, we need to be like, elevate some of these people. Like, obviously it's a massive team. Like, if you watch the end credits of Cyberpunk, you're like, oh my God, what's happening? But you have to realize what an incredible operation it is to bring these to life. So I can only imagine. I'm like retroactively jealous, John, that you got to be there during that time. But that's really, really cool. Incredible experience. I always ask one question before we finish, and
42.
it surrounds, if you could make any one dream that you have in this industry come true. Like, for example, my first guest, Coleman, he founded World Forge Games, and I think his wish was, I'd love to meet Brennan Lee Mulligan, just talked with him. Like, and I was like, wow, that's like Calvin and Hobbes, where Calvin wishes for like a spaceship and Hobbes wishes for like a sandwich, because like one's realistic and one isn't. Like, that could happen. Like, that could totally happen. Instead of saying, I want the biggest RPG company in the world, like his was like, that's perfect, Coleman. Thank you very much for saying that. If you have one dream in this industry, John, that you haven't yet achieved, what is that?
Geez, I can think of two.
Okay.
I'll go with one that kind of speaks to the foundation of role playing tips, where, like, in my opinion, tabletop RPGs is the best game in the world. You
I
get
agree
the
with
video
you.
game designers who disagree, you get the others who disagree, but um, the reason is, in part, for starters, the game master has to learn so many skills and or exercise their brain in so many ways. And so there's leadership, there's meeting and organization and logistics, there's of course imagination, there's strategy and tactics, bit of math, there's world building, there's NPCs. And if you like NPCs, that's a constant practice and empathy, trying to be somebody else for a while and portray them in a way that is intrinsic to them.
Yep.
And the list goes on. And so I can't think of any other game or medium that gets a person doing that. And then, of course, the players, they have a small dose of that themselves. They get to be another character. And how many people actually take time out of their life to say, I'm somebody else for a while. What do I want? Who am I? What are my flaws? What are my advantages and strengths? And so that exercise, if you just applied that to real life, you would, it's a valuable skill. And so anyways, my contention is that the more game masters who are great, then entertain more players, motivate more players to become game masters, and we have more. And I think tabletop RPGs make us smarter.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily in IQ way, but in the ways that I just described. We're just using more of our
Yeah.
potential as people. And so my initial dream was, okay, 10,000 game masters would be master game masters in sort of the Gary Gygaxian sense of game mastery. And I still have that dream. So the number doesn't matter. It's just the more game masters who take it upon themselves to be, I want to be the best GM that I can be, and they start learning these skills and whatnot, it just bleeds over into the rest. Also, the more games that people play, the more it's a social game. So the more that you kind of put down the phone, you walk away from a screen, you even if it's virtual tabletop, you're still connecting with people, which is
Yep.
not trend these days.
Completely agree.
And then playing, you're de-stressing, you're taking a break from harsh reality for many people. You're just a better person and contributing to the world. So I think in like my goal very, very small, 0.00001%, making the world better just by helping game masters have more fun in every game. And even though that's a tagline, that is why I think role playing tips. Somebody asked me, when do I retire? And I said, I guess, until I TPK, because it's such an amazing game. And I want everyone, as many people in the world, to be playing it, because it has many benefits personally and for the world. So that's my dream.
Well, given I founded a company called StoryTogether, I think it's safe to say that we share the same dream, John.
Excellent.
It's so honorable, I think, for what you did. Is like, here's what happened in your life. You were inspired. You viscerally saw how this art form, this activity improves your life, the people around you, the people that decide to invest in it in a meaningful way. And you dedicated, whether you call it a side hustle or a main hustle, I'm sure you're doing just fine, to giving that to others is extremely honorable, and something that I think that we should all be completely in favor of supporting, right? There's so many different ways to attack. What I'm trying to do isn't necessarily tell people how to be a better GM. I'm trying to like provide content that shows that regular people can do this at a high level, right? And have an amazing time. Like, I'll produce like actual, like, nobody in One Giant Leap did it for money. We, as a matter of fact, lost a lot of money on it by renting studios and buying all this equipment. But you have to find a way to show people this is worthy of your time. You don't have to, you can like neither Dungeons nor Dragons and love this very much. It's so hard, I think, to break through that barrier. The system that I'm designing that we use in One Giant Leap is essentially trying to do like a red carpet experience to bring brand new players, so that when they, I hesitate to use the term graduate, but that when they encounter like a fully fledged role-playing system like a Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, whatever that may be, that they're not intimidated by a rule book that's this thick, right? Whereas I love that stuff. I always will love that stuff. When I get, God forbid, God willing, it's a very long time from now, but when I get TPK'd, I'm still going to love it, right? But I think, I just want to commend you, John, for all of the amazing effort. Like, think about how many thousands of hours that you've put out in the last 30 years dedicated to that goal, and how many people, thousands of people that I'm certain that you have helped. I just want to, say on behalf of the community, I appreciate it. And I completely agree with your mission. And I sincerely hope with every fiber of my being that it comes true. How about that?
Yeah, that would be awesome. And I'm still learning how to be a better GM. I have a lot to learn still. So there's much more road to travel. So thank you so much.
Always, John. Well, I just want to say I sincerely appreciate your time here on this random February Wednesday evening. I hope it's not the last time we talk, John. And again, best of luck with everything at, role playing tips and everything that you have in your diaspora of helping people become better GMs. Sincerely hope that it all goes according to plan, if not better. Right. Well, really appreciate your time, John.